Super excited to be here. I'm going to describe to you my experiences visiting other worlds in under 15 minutes. We'll see how that goes. But I do want to kind of get a read of the group. How many of you all have read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, or maybe seen the Netflix? Okay. Okay, now this next question, you can kind of read between the lines for plausible deniability. How many of you have a very close friend who has taken psychedelics and explained it to you in a way to where you really fully understand it? Oh, wow, okay. All right. Okay, tough. This is gonna be a tough crowd. Okay, so I changed the title slightly, but it's the same idea, which is how to make psychedelic technology accessible to everyone, because it's currently not, and it's a huge problem, I think, for the scalability of the movement. So we're going to get into that, but I am going to describe to you at least my personal journey with psychedelics, researching psychedelics now for 3 years. I will say a disclaimer that my lawyer told me to say is that psychedelics are very powerful substances. You should never take them except in accordance with U.S. law and under the guidance of a health professional. So that's just for that little caveat. So, I haven't been a Mormon for 30 years, but what do they say? You can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. So I'm back. Go figure. Very active, extremely active in sports, mountain biking. And in fact, what I do know about psychedelics is that they're transformational, but they apparently do not help you with common sense, because in spite of a very bad accident I had paragliding, I'm still a paraglider. This was a picture taken on Jupiter Peak in August of 2020, where I was running off of Jupiter Peak. And then a week later, I was lying down on Jupiter Peak, had broke my back, fell out of the sky, and suffered concussion, and kind of in between a concussion and a TBI. And after about a year and a half, the traditional medical community fired me. They said, we have no idea, brain scans, we can't help you with your tinnitus, with your hyperacusis. And so I started to look for other alternatives and pretty much tried everything under the sun, and then was reading about a Johns Hopkins study about the use of psilocybin for traumatic brain injury and also for tinnitus. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. It didn't help with the tinnitus. It didn't help with the TBI, but it essentially woke me up from what I consider was about 60 years of sleepwalking through life, relatively speaking. So I wanted to start by, I don't know if anyone has seen this comedian. She's a local comedian, Aliana Hershey. She has a skit about ex-Mormons and psychedelics. She says, I want to tell my ex-Mormon friends, you don't have to do psychedelics, apparently. And she says, they love their psychedelics. I have my ex-Mormon friends say they don't believe in God anymore, but they're hoping to meet him tonight on 10 grams of mushrooms. And it always gets a laugh because it's true. It's true. Ex-Mormons feel like they have to take psychedelics, but she's actually wrong. You don't need 10 grams. You can probably do it at about 3 or 4, depending on the strength of your. People tell me that is. I mean, I wouldn't know myself. And what's interesting about this quote and why it gets such a laugh, and what I liked about it is that it really showed that transcendence is something that is irrespective of a faith, of a belief in anything. People of faith want it, secularists want it, atheists want it, humanists want it. And in spite of that kind of universal appeal of transcendence and the ability for psychedelics to help us with that, here's the challenge. Any technology controlled by a few will not evolve or scale to benefit the whole. And we have a few examples of this. Open source software was essentially relegated to hackers and anarchists initially until it was adopted by corporations. Yoga mindfulness was definitely a niche type of an activity until it was repackaged and secularized, and then it became mainstream. And online dating was really creepy initially. I don't know if anyone remembers. Initially, online dating was really considered marginalized among the mainstream, and then better user interfaces, and it became normalized. So the problem is whether this is happening with psychedelics yet. And it should have gone mainstream by now. because we've had, when I'm talking about the psychedelic renaissance, I'm talking about what's happened from about the year 2000 till the current time. The benefits are under active clinical trials across the country, actually across the world now. There's a lot of evidence about the very transformational aspects of psychedelics to help with people that have PTSD, especially veterans, heroin addicts, people that have addictions, drinking, smoking, et cetera. And even half of conservatives now support it for therapeutic use. However, this is what we see in the psychedelic culture today. This was the MAPS conference, which is the strangest, most bizarre. It's kind of like a mix between a medical convention and Burning Man. It's really weird. It's a global conference that happens every 2 years. This was the 2023 conference. I had just begun my research into psychedelics. I was about 2 months in, and being a new convert, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go over to this global conference where all of my fellow enlightened people will be, and we're going to be floating around, a few inches off the ground. This is going to be awesome. And this was the plenary session. I think there were about in this audience, I think there were about 6,000 people at the plenary session. Rick Doblin, who's the founder of MAPS, came out, gave his opening comments, and then he said, "I want to introduce you to someone who has single-handedly done more to help the cause for veterans, access to psychedelics than anyone else, former Texas Governor Rick Perry." And Rick Perry came out on the stage, and about 200 people got up and walked out, and about a third of the crowd booed him. And it was a punch to the gut to me because, first off, I think booing is tacky. It's just tacky. Whether you disagree with people or not, just booing them is tacky. But I thought, well, I'm going to this conference with all these incredibly enlightened people, and everyone's going to be welcome. It's going to be one big happy family of, people getting high together, right? Well, I was mistaken. And over the next 3 days, what I saw was, I don't know why I have in there walkouts reported. I was there. I saw them walking out. But what I saw was not only a rejection of someone just because he happened to have been a Republican from Texas, but there was almost the entire agenda was about decolonizing, eliminating whiteness. It was had a very left of center feel to it. And when it didn't, it was fully, the culture and the discussion was fully on the medical side. So you either had the therapeutic medical nomenclature and culture, or you had what I'll call the kind of the woo-woo culture, new age culture, but very, very left of center. There wasn't a single panel on the nuclear family, on how psychedelics could make you be a better parent, a better mother, a better father, anything that kind of had a sense of traditional values, Western values, was definitely not only not focused on, it was seen as there was somewhat a hostile view towards Western cultures. Indigenous ways of knowing were elevated above Western ways of knowing across the board. And so essentially, if you were a conservative, small C conservative like me or a normie, you just weren't welcome. I mean, it wasn't a place where you would, I was fine because I had already kind of been transformed, right? So I was able to navigate through that culture. But if I had come in off the street, it wouldn't have been a place that I would have felt I was at home. And so if we're going to advance this technology that I'm going to talk about in a second in terms of how transformational I think it is, we really need to, I think, break this cultural centralization. And the issue isn't that there are left of center people in the movement or that there are leftists in the movement. The problem is that is essentially, for all practical purposes, the exclusive culture that exists within the movement today. And that just makes it uninviting for over half of the American adult population. So psychedelics are for everyone, I think, even ex-Mormons like me, especially I think people of faith, which you see very few people of faith within the psychedelic community today. It's so interesting because you'll have people that would never find themselves in a church. They would never mention the word Jesus, but they have no problem saying that, because Mercury's in retrograde, they're in a bad mood. So I don't quite understand. They've essentially, they have a religion. It just doesn't happen to be what I would call a traditional religion. And here's where it gets interesting, because Psychedelics are meta-political, they're meta-philosophical. In my view, if they're used properly, they create outcomes which are not content specific. So these are all of the things that I've experienced that apparently a lot of your friends have experienced as well. But what's interesting about these common experiences is that they don't necessarily move you in any specific direction, or if used properly, I think psychedelics should generate more questions than answers. Because it's in those questions that I think my journey has begun. And I'm going to give some specific examples of how I feel like I've experienced some pretty transformational things in my life in the last 3 years since I've been conducting this research. But what I find fascinating is you have like oceanic connectedness and expansion. You never have this experience of, I don't know, dungeon-like restriction. I don't know what would be the opposite of oceanic expansion. It's interesting how these outcomes, when you quiet the mind, when you quiet the narrative, these other things come out which can really bring us together. It can bring us together in terms of our relationship to ourselves, also bring us together in relationship to each other. Love and acceptance, the experiences that I've had on psilocybin, ketamine, LSD, MDMA, has been a type of an acceptance in love that I never had actually felt in my life before. And very, very hard to describe in words. All of these experiences are hard to describe in words because they have been essentially embodied experiences. So I'm going to see if this runs, and if it doesn't, I don't know with the video here. Okay, so I was trying to look at some videos on YouTube that would recreate some experiences that I've experienced, and I pulled these off. These are scenes from Interstellar, if you remember, when they're on the event horizon, and then there's one that's going to be coming up here in a minute where McConaughey is in the Tesseract. I have had experiences like this, but once I put them on the screen and I watched them, I thought, they just don't do justice to the embodied experience that I have felt while in psychedelics, because even as I'm looking at them now, I realize how they fall short, because I was not only I wasn't observing the experiences as much as I was in them, and they were always accompanied with a sense of oneness, of connection, of calmness, that everything was going to be all right at the end of the day. Like the experience I had, one experience I had was kind of one of those cosmic experiences where we were entering an event horizon. All of my family members were with me, and it was related to death, and they were all essentially getting sucked into the black hole. And as they would disappear beyond the event horizon, they would turn back to me and they would say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It was the most incredible embodied experience that I think I've ever had. And so looking at this and even remembering how much I love this movie, it just doesn't do it justice to look at something and think that because you're observing this, it's the same experience as the one that you're having when you're in psychedelics. So in terms of a personal transformation, I want to just give 3 examples. A lot of things have happened in my life in the last 3 years since I've been on this research program. And I wanted to talk about 3 specifically: in the political, religious, and intimate. As a small C conservative and a constitutional, a student of constitutional law, as a lawyer, I was always very, very, very concerned about the rise of Donald Trump as a candidate. When he won the election, I became a never Trumper, and I immediately saw the people who supported Trump and MAGA as the others. But since I started taking psychedelics, I've really been able to identify more with what people that are MAGA supporters and Trump supporters feel, how they think. I've been able to have conversations with them, and it hasn't really changed my position politically, but it's been interesting how I've been able to, it has increased the depth of understanding that I have about people that are not like me or don't think like me. In the religious context, I've been able to A/B test this one. This has been an interesting one because I travel a lot to Latin America, so I'm always on planes with missionaries headed to the Missionary Training Center in Mexico. And ever since I've left the church, I've always been very civil and cordial, and half of my family are still active and the others are not. But I've always felt judged, and I've always been a little bit judgy. Always civil, but there's always been that barrier there. And in the same when I would sit next to these missionaries on the airplane, I'd be nice to them and I'd tell them what I thought about how they should have good missions and giving them recommendations. But there was always that resistance. And then I took psychedelics, and I was down about a year ago, headed to Mexico, and this missionary, fresh out of high school. Just to give you an idea of what a different world he was in than I was in. He said, I'm going to El Salvador. It's really violent there. And even though there are a lot of Catholics and they're not Christians, they're really into Jesus. So I sat there and I thought, okay, there's so many things that are inaccurate about that single statement. But in spite of that, for an hour on the plane, I was so getting into his mission, and I was just so excited about it, and he was excited about it. And we left, we parted ways because at the end of the flight, and it was such a transformational experience for me to be able to be in his space, in his world, and really celebrate it, and still not be absorbed into it. I still have my world. I still have my beliefs. And then the last one is with my wife. I think I probably have had an average marriage, probably 80% of the marriages out there. You never really know how people's marriages are. But I realized after those initial psychedelic ceremonies that I had been really emotionally distant from my wife, that she had been trying to get things from me, justifiable things from me as her husband that I just wasn't willing to give, wasn't willing to be vulnerable. And through multiple sessions with her in Psilocybin and MDMA, we've grown extremely, extremely close. And I'm able to not be as emotionally distant. So I got 1 minute left. I just want to really quickly tell you about this. Gary Hess is a friend of mine. All of these experiences have helped me not just see other people, but in some instances actually be other people. I had a ketamine experience where I was actually my wife looking at me. That was terrifying. I really feel sorry I have much more sympathy for my wife now after having had that experience. But that disassociated nature of that subject object dissolving. Gary Hess was Special Forces. He was in several tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. And when he was in Fallujah, his platoon was in a building that was hit by a suicide bomber, and it killed several of his teammates. And during an ayahuasca journey, he said that he became the suicide bomber, and he was kissing his children goodbye for the last time, and his wife. And he said it was the most incredible experience because he wasn't observing this suicide bomber going through this activity. He was the suicide bomber. He could feel his fear. He could feel that he thought he was engaged in a just cause, trying to get the infidel out of his country. And he said it was one of the transformational experiences for him and helped him come back from healing from a whole lot of trauma that he experienced when he was in combat. And it's this notion that, once again, when you quiet the narrative, when you quiet the chatter in your brain, the psychedelics, then all kinds of other interesting things happen. Okay, I'm over time, so I'm going to just make this really quick. So this is the fun. I don't know if you all remember the 1980s. This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. So this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. This is LSD. Actually, this is from, I think, a Johns Hopkins study. Your brain becomes very disorganized under psychedelics. The default mode network becomes disorganized, and many other places in the brain light up that otherwise just aren't that active. They're not quite sure whether you need these spiritual experiences in order to have the kind of therapeutic outcomes that you have. That's still a big debate within the community. And another debate is, are these metaphysical, or are they just happening inside the four corners of our skull? Who knows? I'll leave that to the theologians and the philosophers. My view is it making me a better person? And why it matters, right? We're a society that seems to not be able to get along with each other any longer. And I think that we need new tools of understanding each other, new tools of how we can communicate with each other. And so My perspective is that the movement needs to be free from the medical establishment model. It needs to be free from the critical theory model, which is very, very deep-seated now within the movement. It needs to be free from the New Age spirituality model and any other type of a model, capitalism, Christianity. In other words, I think a mosaic of all different people in types and beliefs need to participate in the movement, and there shouldn't be a monolithic or a kind of a monocultural within the movement. And right now, it's unfortunately predominantly either the medical establishment or this left of center New Age spirituality, which I think is really limiting the mainstream from getting involved. And since we're not going to be invited in, my challenge to the people that I talk to that are kind of mainstream or normies is that we just need to invite ourselves into this party for our benefit as well as for the benefit of the movement. Thank you.